The potential for communication not to occur at the time at which it is required is incredibly easy, of which those communications can easily lead to difficulties and frustrations if people feel they should have been told about something and aren't told about it. And this, I think, can easily lead to one of the things that we would want to emphasise strongly here, which is that there's a capacity to develop beliefs about that all agencies and staff within agencies develop beliefs about other agencies, which I think can easily undermine the capacity for networks to work together. These beliefs don't occur accidentally. There are biased feedback mechanisms that we are all prone to in working with particular agencies that we really just want to I just want to highlight. There are two functions here. Firstly, two mechanisms by which the kind of feedback we get about other agencies is in some sense biased. One of which is that we are exposed to negative comments, negative kind of feedback about other agencies from our clients. That it's very kind of easy for clients to, as part of their efforts to engage with us, to emphasise the degree to which their experience of other agencies has been unhelpful. The degree to which we buy into some of these descriptions that the social worker, for example, for myself as a CAMS worker, that I hear from clients how unhelpful a social worker has been, is, it seems to me, a kind of risk that I can start to be influenced by these kind of descriptions from my client group. But there is a part of their efforts to engage with us can be partly generated by a kind of emphasising that their expectation or their anticipation is that we're going to be better than the next people. Of course, the likelihood of disappointment in these kind of methods is high. So that it seems to us that all agencies are prone to a kind of degree of myth-making that goes on about each other that has a tendency towards negativity. And that a belief that social workers always do this, that CAMS workers are only interested in therapy, that CAMS workers never come out of their therapy room, that social workers are just trying to remove kids. Whatever these kind of myths are that go on within networks need to be constantly examined and in our view are part of a kind of mentalizing stance in which one is trying to make sense of one's own state of mind towards somebody else and to try and make sense of their state of mind towards us. Why is this social worker behaving towards me in this particular way? Maybe something to do with their beliefs about what psychologists, and in my particular case, how psychologists tend to behave. Similarly, my kind of way of working in relation to a social worker may similarly be rather influenced by preconceptions that I have about social workers in general. This, in our view, is that there's a constant need to mentalise, make sense of both our own behaviour and others, in order to enable networks to work more functionally. It's not only interpersonal that some of these difficulties can arise. It is also to do with, there can be sort of just policy contradictions or just differences of priority. For schools, if they're particularly being evaluated in terms of, for example, attendance levels, there may be all sorts of rather unintended motivations, either to emphasise attendance as being the one thing that the network has to kind of focus on, or of course more perversely, things like exclusion might be ways of trying to address keeping attendance levels high by excluding kids where attendance is likely to continue to be poor over a long period of time. So that for a school, there are going to be ways in which they are assessed, for schools and for all agencies, ways that they're going to be assessed that may influence the way workers prioritise the kind of focus of their work, and sometimes these do not add up. I mean, for example, a social care agency might have a view, for example, that the outcomes for young people coming into care post-30 during adolescence is generally poor, and would be really reluctant to move towards looking after kids who are coming into the care system at that kind of age. And yet, so that might be a general stance of an agency, it might be a bit of a kind of policy, there might be a view that that there are too many kids in care at the moment, or there might even be, and I'm coming to the next point, there may be financial constraints that actually, whatever the network around the kid may believe to be useful, there may be all sorts of limitations on what actual workers can do in terms of, for example, lengths of treatment that may be constrained by policies held by a CAM service, or particular constraints about the numbers of kids that the local authority would want to support in care, or for example the number of kids that may be seen suitable for special education. Some of these are just deliberately capped on a proportion of the population that this will be available to. So these things make inevitably create dilemmas for a network around the child. So our assumptions in AMBIT is that there is a degree of disintegration, a degree of explicit difference that exists. We don't just buy into a harmonious, integrated model of networks, and we're not disappointed, we're not frustrated. We start from a point of view we've got to work with this. This is a starting point. But we are working towards developing a shared understanding of the problem as much as we can, having agreed interventions and a collaborative relationships, and we believe those things for effectiveness will improve. So it's an effort, but our starting point is that we can't assume that from the beginning. So we're interested in trying to work out what parts of the system are helping or hindering this development. So we've developed a method. This is a kind of what we call a grid. This is a grid that we do. It's called a disintegration grid. Now I just want to look at this a little bit more carefully. In the example I showed earlier, we've got the domains along the top, and we've taken 4 of the key kind of people or agencies that were described in the case that I was looking at. So we've got grandmother, youth worker, school senko, and young person. We've got those along the top, and then we've got your 3 levels of integration or disintegration: explanation, what's the problem; intervention, what to do; and responsibility, who can help, down the left-hand side. We do this grid is incredibly simple deliberately. You don't have to have lots of complicated equipment in order to just use this tool to help make sense of a network around the child. You can do it even on the back of a piece of paper in a professionals meeting if you're trying to work out what's going on here. So what we try and map out in simple kind of terms, bottom line kind of things, is okay. So if we look at the grandmother, what's grandmother's explanation for what the problem is with this young person that she's looking after? Well, her view is that he's got in with a bad lot. So with peer relationships, he's got linked into gangs. So it's peer influence is the problem. That's what she understands. He's a good lad, but he's got into bad company, and that's her theory as to what it is. So we're trying to for the youth worker, the predominant theory about the young person's difficulties is an increasing dependency on the use of cannabis, and that the pattern of using cannabis is becoming increasingly concerning to the youth worker, who thinks that many of the difficulties are linked to cannabis use. The school senko, so we've got rather different kind of emphasis as to what is leading to this young person's difficult behaviour and distress at the current time. The senko, the belief is that the whole problem is due to a lack of authority in the family. That there's no authority in the family to support school attendance. The avoidance of school attendance is exacerbating all sorts of difficulties. And if we just put the young person in this chart, what's his view as to what the difficulty is? His difficulty is he's got no money. We've got very different explanations as to what is causing trouble in the young person's life. In the next bit we look, okay, so what are people's theories as to what to do? The grandmother's own experience of her own upbringing was somewhat troubled, has a view that what he needs to do is go to boarding school, take him away from the peer group influence. She recognises her own inability to influence his life in the way that maybe others would want, and just would like him to be given an opportunity to receive education in a boarding school setting. The youth worker believes that the critical thing is to try to engage the young person with the local drugs team, and he's also working to try to alter the friendship group, and he's trying to engage the young person in some of the youth work kind of activities to try to enable him to have a different experience of peer relationships. The school Senko is clear, it's got rather a kind of clear view that what the young person needs to do is to go into care. That they need a kind of completely different that this young person needs a completely different social care environment in which to then prosper in making use of education. And the young person is clear what the problem is. They need some way of getting hold of money to support their drug habit, in order to stop offending, which is causing some of the difficulties that are bringing the young person to the attention of the authorities. So who's responsible for different things? Again, you go along the bottom of this. For the grandmother, who's responsible to get this sorted would be the education authority. For the youth worker, they would emphasise the responsibilities of the drug and alcohol team and the youth club that they're trying to engage the young person in. For the Skenko, the primary responsibility is with social care. And for the young person, really what sits behind his resentment about lack of money is the way that his dad is seen as not providing him with what he wants from his dad, which he wants his dad to provide him with money. So that you can see that out of this, that is what we describe as a kind of disintegrated network, in which the disintegration is at all three levels, an explanation of what's the problem, what to do, and what can help. Now, it's no good just having an explanation, okay, we've mapped things out. Why? Why do we map things out? The critical bit here is that, okay, how do we then, as you will have heard in other kind of aspects of ambit, there is always both reflection and then return to task. Reflection and return to task. This is a theme of ambit. We don't do reflection without trying to think, okay, so how does this enable a degree of action? Now, the point here is that the use of the grid is to try to what we call encourage critical conversations to take place across the young person's network. Now, we're not talking ideal practice. We might have a worker, an ambit worker, who can give, it's got lots of other cases. Can't just allocate huge amounts of time to deal with the network, to talk to everybody in the network. It's not possible. This is not how it works on the ground. It may be ideal to have very, very, very well coordinated networks around a young person, and often this is achieved, but it's not easy and it's very time consuming. So what the point of this is that we're trying to identify what would be some critical conversations that could take place in order to help the network work around the issues, not just coordinated practice, but work around the issues of explanation, intervention and responsibility. So what we've identified here is what seems to me we need to have a conversation about money. We need to have a conversation about money. How does this young person get money? That's his theory about how it would improve his life. How does he get money? What's the legitimate way of getting money? And we need to start to have a conversation with his carer, who has responsibilities for this. So our first thing is, let's think about how grandmother and young person may need to meet together to talk about money. I suspect they have all sorts of kind of arguments, rows, disagreements, conflicts about money all the time. But here's a kind of point of where the effort to bring together a degree of shared approach to what the young person's theory of what will make things better, what other people will make things better, can be trying to be brought together. Money, a critical issue often with young people who focus on ambit, and sometimes I think not given sufficient importance, particularly from a CAM's point of view, as to what might be, what needs very, very specific attention as part of an intervention. So here, out of this, we think, okay, these are big differences of points of view. We've got to start to work to see if we can develop some kind of way of working with this. The second out of this was and then again, this may seem like this doesn't happen routinely, is we might try and kind of encourage a conversation to take place between the youth worker and the school Senko. These are not professionals that necessarily meet up that easily. They don't necessarily bump into each other in the usual kind of ways that services link up. But both might have a commitment to this young person with very different theories about what would be helpful. And that a part of an ambit approach would be, is there a way that we could try and help these two people who are part of the solution? They're part of the solution around this young person, but they've got different ideas about what the solution is. So how do we help them to kind of have a conversation? And the idea would be that an ambit worker might speak with both of them, think about whether we could meet up together, or even encourage them to speak to each other. And again, there's kind of ways in which it's trying to think, what can I do when I've got 20 minutes to kind of contribute into this case? What are the critical ways in which we could help this network to work more functionally? And I'm going to keep emphasising, it's about trying to develop shared understandings, understanding what's my point of view and what somebody else's point of view. There always has to be an agreement. It's not always that we're not always going to get to a perfect agreement, but there's an effort to mentalise and increase the capacity of the network around the young person to make sense of other people's behaviour in the network and their own behaviour in the network, because this is predicated on an idea that if a network can function in a more explicit, mentalised kind of style of working, it is likely, not certain, but it's likely that this is going to lead to improved functioning of the network around the young person. So I'm just coming back at the end. This is really just this is the kind of grid, and it's saying you just simply can put anyone you like along the top. If you've done your mapping, you just take the key people, key people are in the young person. It's best not to overcomplicate it. You don't want hundreds of different domains along the front, along the top of the diagram, because it gets just complicated. You want to focus on the things that may be absolutely critical, that you're trying to kind of make sense of, because the way the network is functioning is not always easy to make sense of. So that you can use this in whatever way you like. There's not a particular kind of, in terms of the kind of people or the agencies that you put into this domain. But the intention here is not just to draw a picture. The intention of this is that this leads to an understanding of what might be the critical actions to take place. And one of the areas where this can be used in team discussions, in an ambit team, or it can be used in supervision. Somebody saying, this case is really doing my head in, and it can be used to say, okay, let's see what is it about this case that's doing your head in. Let's look at the network. Let's map out the network using this method, and this is what we would very much kind of encourage as part of the whole approach. So the key messages in relation to network disintegration and network working is that ambit is not a method of working of which we do ambit therapy separated from the network around the young person. Secondly, we emphasise the importance of the network of both professional and non-professional relationships. Where possible, if it's possible to engage key people in key peer relationships within the young person's natural ecology, this is great. Sometimes there can be a real value, for example, in engaging romantic partners, if they're boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever, if they are seen to have a constructive kind of role in the young person's life. So we don't see networks as being just narrowly defined in terms of professional relationships. It's more broadly kind of conceptualised than that. And thirdly, the kind of thing that we really want to stay focused on is not just about coordination. The effort is to make sense of other people's behaviour, thinking, beliefs and feelings in the network using a mentalising kind of style approach, and helping us to make sense of our own kind of feelings, sometimes quite strong, either positive or negative. Often the ones we notice more are the negative ones, where we may be experiencing high levels of frustration or even anger in relation to parts of the network, when clearly our intention is to try to work in such a way that we're maximising the capacity for collaborative practice. Clearly collaborative practice is not easy if one's own state of mind is that other people are behaving in ways that are not easy to understand or don't meet our expectations of them. Thank you. Hopefully this gives you a clear kind of overview of what we understand by working in a network and our approach of thinking about it in terms of network disintegration.